Welcome back. This is the second part to our favourite subgenres podcast. Unfortunately, we couldn't fit it all into one podcast, so we've actually had to split it in two. So glad to have you back on board. And your number one pick. So basically, I've got it in second place, you've got it in first place, and that is slasher movies. I think everyone knew this was coming. I don't think you have to be psychic to realise that we love slasher films. I know Samuel does as well. No, not in his top three. He does like slasher films, just not as quite as high for you, is it, Samuel?
Oh, no. However, I'd be lying if I said that there are some slasher films that have a real place in my heart.
Yeah. I mean, where do we start with this? Because I'd say half of the podcasts I've done are on slasher movies, because I'm probably going to be repeating myself a lot here. Let's see. Halloween. I mean, it's Halloween. It's like the commercial success of that really kind of helped to kickstart the slasher genre. The golden age really kind of started with Halloween, didn't it? And we had so many slasher films following in its footsteps. 1980 alone, you had the likes of He Knows You're Alone, Terror Train, Prom Night. 81, I think you'd agree, Darren, the busiest year in the history of slasher films.
Yeah, that's probably my favourite year. You've got My Bloody Valentine, The Burning, The Funhouse, The Prowler. I could go on and on.
Happy Birthday to Me, Halloween 2, Friday the 13th Part 2. Night School, which I actually watched for the first time last night.
Right, so quickly, what was your thoughts on that?
Night School, I liked it. I actually liked it. Do you know what?
Good.
I worked out, I mean, you haven't got to be Sherlock Holmes to work out who the killer is. I worked out who the killer was within the first 20, 25 minutes and whatever. So the whole kind of mystery aspect was kind of gone for me. But I liked it. I thought it had some effective set pieces. And it's definitely one of them films, even though it's categorised as a slasher movie, there's definitely a lot of giallo aesthetics to it.
Oh, yeah, the look of the killer, exactly.
Which, again, gets back to one of the films you were talking about, Strip Nude for Your Killer. The killer wearing a motorcycle helmet. And what was the other one? What have they done to your daughters as well?
That's right. You've got Nightmare Beach as well. They've all got a similar look.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
Well, with slasher movies, you could say it's probably certainly one of, if not the most cliche-ridden of all subgenres of horror. Typically, your most slasher films follow a killer bumping off, not always teens, but traditionally teens, younger people, being bumped off one by one. You know, a lot of the time the killer might be masked or horribly disfigured. It might be a revenge tale, kind of like they're doing this for a specific reason, of a wrongdoing in the past, etc. It's that kind of trope, or an escaped maniac and whatever. Teens being bumped off one by one, and usually there's at least one survivor, usually a final girl. Not always the case, but in the majority of these films. And the whole kind of, the film Scream that really revived that subgenre in the 90s, very successfully, slasher movies made a comeback. And, Randy in that film addresses, typically in these films, the people who have sex die, the people that drink die and do drugs. So there's these kind of rules in that. And it's just kind of that fun kind of aspect of it. It's kind of like, we know the conventions, we know the cliches, but do you know what? They don't become any less entertaining.
No, that's right. I kind of like some of the knockoffs to Scream better than Scream itself. With the Scream series, where I know you two are both big fans of that series, I sort of prefer Scream 2, if I'm honest, because I probably got to a point where I've seen Scream so many times that now I sort of do prefer the second one. And that's not to say it's a better film. It's just what I prefer. But I really like Urban Legend. I Know What You Did Last Summer, and the first two sequels for them.
Yeah.
And then you had a whole slew of them coming out. Then you had Valentine, Cherry Falls, which I think is a good one, underrated.
Yeah.
And then, going on from that as well, we sort of got quite a few more recent ones that I got mentioned here. Well, again, I'd like to know your thoughts on these if you've seen these films. Is Your Next?
Your Next was good fun. Yeah, Your Next was good fun. It's kind of like it just has it has a lot of fun with the conventions and that. It's a film. It's kind of a home invasion movie, isn't it?
Very much in the same vein as something like Hush that come out as well.
Yeah,
a bit afterwards.
Yeah. I tell you, there is a slasher film, quite a modern slasher movie that was quite good, called Hellfest.
I got that written down. Yeah, I was
Yes.
going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Hellfest was quite good. Not a traditional slasher movie, but certainly slasher movie elements to it. There's a film called Haunt.
That's right, yeah, coming pretty much the same time.
Yeah, Haunt was actually quite good. I like that. I mean, some of my favourites, right? I mean, obviously got the obvious ones, right? Everyone that knows me knows my favourites. Yeah, Halloween, Friday the 13th, I love Terror Train, My Bloody Valentine, The Prowler. I tell you one that is also one of my favourites, okay? And I have not done a podcast on this yet. And that was, it released in 86, April Fool's Day.
Yes, funny enough, I got the poster to that, the original one sheet. I've been meaning to pick up the Scream Factory overseas release of that, but that's really one of my favourite films.
Yeah.
And again, that was treated at the time, people hated it because of the twist ending.
Do you know what, right? It's that twist ending that makes it stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people say this to me, right? I've been bashed for saying this, right? There's people out there who are like, it's not a slasher movie. And I'm like, it is. All right, nobody dies. Spoiler alert. I think, look, in this day and age, right, I think audiences are very savvy. I think you realise the film's called April Fool's Day. I think you probably realise there's going to be a twist. But the film is very much in the mould of a slasher film. There's a very Agatha Christie-esque vibe to it. I really enjoy it, and I don't agree with anyone that says it's not a slasher film. Just because nobody dies, the whole mould of the movie is slasher all over it.
I can't understand, people who don't like that film, because you're going into these films not with logic anyway.
No.
You know, if you're watching a slasher from the 1980s, you know, you pretty much know there's going to be some sort of a logical, you know, behavior or explanation or whatever. Yeah. In the same way, like Friday the 13th Part 5, people hate on that film because it's not Jason. But we see Jason in the film, throughout the film, with a mask. Yeah. Coming, you know, in Tommy's imagination and that. Yeah. So I don't understand why people get, you know,
it's one of the most saturated of the 80s. It's certainly without a doubt one of the most saturated subgenres of horror, without a doubt. You know, you had so many franchises and all that going on. You know, Friday the 13th and that, and Nightmare on Elm Street again, which at its core is a slasher movie. All right, it's a very different kind of slasher film with a very, supernatural, surrealistic edge to it. But again, that's what really makes a movie like Nightmare on Elm Street stand out. I think there's one that doesn't get talked about that much, and that's called Alone in the Dark, released in 82.
Oh, my God, now you're talking. That's probably, that would make my top 25, I think.
Yeah, a great cast. I mean, you got Martin Landau, Donald Pleasant, you've got Jack Palance, and... you know, the 80s was a great decade. All right, admittedly, there's a lot of crap out there. There is a lot of bad slasher films out there, but there's a lot of really good ones.
And there's some nasty stuff as well.
Yeah. And then going into the 90s, all right, I will say this. No slasher movie after Scream did I like more than Scream. I will say that. Scream 2 is a solid sequel. I really do like Scream 2. And I think the sequel holds up to the first film without a doubt. Urban Legend, I do like it. I do actually like that film. You know, it tried to do some kind of unique, original thing with slasher. You know, the whole urban legend gimmick in that film. I know what we did last summer. I quite like it. It's very much in the mould, isn't it, of like 80s slasher films.
I prefer the sequel, but I do.
The sequel's very much mould like an 80s slasher film for 98, isn't it? There is a slasher movie I want to talk about quickly that not enough people have seen. It's foreign language, and it's called Cold Prey, released in 2006.
It's Norwegian, I believe.
That's a solid slasher film, but again, because I know a lot of people that are put off by foreign language films. They don't do subtitled films, and it's a shame because Cold Prey is a really good slasher movie. And I'll say that the sequel, Cold Prey 2, is just as good, if not arguably better. I know some people that prefer the sequel. With
the Cold Prey series, I really like the first one where you've got, you know, I've not seen the sequel, which I believe is in the hospital. Yeah. But the first one, it's got the snowy atmosphere setting. Yeah. And I think that works really well. Yeah. And again, I don't get people who don't watch films because they don't want to read. Yeah. Because you're missing out on so many good things. Yeah.
You're not kidding. In fact, actually, do you know what? I'm glad you brought them up, actually, because there's a Hong Kong slasher film that came out in 2010, which I'm absolutely in awe over. It's called Dream Home.
Okay.
I've got that on DVD, but I've never seen it.
Oh, I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's one of those that it's one of those stronger slasher films, if you want to call it as such. I mean, then again, I'm the kind of person who loves Maniac when it comes to the slasher films. Dream Home, though, like it has a brain in its head. It's got it's some parts are very logical the way it jumps through time. However, just watching just this performance from was it Josie Ho, I think her name is. My apologies if I said it wrong. Just going on an absolute killing spree is sickeningly entertaining and gruesomely dark. So in terms of a contemporary foreign slasher film, that's one I would put my finger towards.
Well, like I said, I've got that, so I'll be watching that pretty soon from what you've been saying there. One I do want to mention from the early 80s again, I watched yesterday, was Nightmare in a Damaged Brain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which the distributor got arrested for that film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. But the whole, look of the killer at the end, you got this annoying little brat of a kid. It's just so funny. But the whole atmosphere, you got the old 42nd Street vibe, where he's walking down New York City.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, you see all the peep shows and all that. I love that aspect to it.
Yeah.
I think it's really doesn't get the credit it deserves again. One of those that probably got lost in the shuffle.
That's the problem. There was so many being churned out, and it was like hard to keep attention on all of them. Around that period, the early 80s especially, kind of like 80, 81, 82, just so many. And I'm not doing this podcast without mentioning Black Christmas from 74.
I'm glad you mentioned that one.
No, I mean, when that came out, of course, there weren't such a thing as a slasher movie. That term slasher movie wasn't being thrown about. Even when Halloween came out, the term slasher movie, that wasn't a term that was used. Black Christmas came out, 4 years before Halloween. Obviously played a big part in kind of the evolution of slasher movies as they're now known. And it's still one of the very best.
I think it's the best. I think, for me personally, it's the best slasher movie ever made. I'd put it above Halloween. I really do. I just think Bob Clark, he just created something there that is probably one of the films that's most, copied, over the years. That and
kidding.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact you've got 2 remakes already of Black Christmas, I think that says so much, and yet they failed to capture what it is. Although that said, we've argued quite a bit, Barry, over the ending. Over the open ending.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it is an open ending. I mean, it would heavily imply that she's going to die. I mean, I love the ending. I actually love the ending to that film. And I just love the sense of atmosphere to it. I just love that sense of claustrophobia. And the fact that, as I've said a million times before, I'm a less is more guy. And I like the fact that you don't see much of the killer. There's that kind of air of mystery to it, and the telephone calls are disturbing, and it plays on that fear, that urban legend of the killers inside the house. It's a great movie, and it to me personally, it's still probably the most effectively scary slasher film out there. And
I don't know if you know this, but it played on Channel 4 years ago, and they actually used the C word.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I think it played Christmas. They used to play on Christmas Eve on Channel 4 quite a bit.
I watched it. That's what I watched it on. I think it was Channel 4. I actually watched it. I was late to that film, man. I didn't see Black Christmas until I was about 14, 15. I hadn't seen it before. I'd heard of it, and it made an impression on me. It impacted me. Halloween is, again, one of my all-time favourites. I absolutely love the original Halloween, but I actually find Black Christmas much scarier. I think Halloween's so brilliantly made, though, considering the budget and just... I mean, they shot the whole film in 21 days. I think it was just executed to pretty much perfection, for what that film was.
And of course, we wouldn't have Halloween if it wasn't for Black Christmas, because I think it's well known, the story of Bob Clark was talking to John Carpenter, and he mentioned, what would you do if you were doing a sequel to Black Christmas? He'd say, I'd call it Halloween, and I'd base it on Halloween. And then it's allegedly anyway.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, we could do like a 6-hour podcast just talking about slasher movies, but we're going to have to move on to the next. But yeah, slasher movies are one that I certainly have a soft spot for. They're one of the most maligned among critics. Slasher movies. There's not a huge amount of slasher films out there that get great critical reception. But they have an ardent fan base. They are one of the most popular
Yeah.
subgenres of horror, without a doubt. And since I've been podcasting here and seen this community, this huge horror community online, it just it blows my mind of just how many slasher fans are actually out there. It's crazy. But yeah, so we're now on, I believe this is Samuel's number 1 pick.
Okay, so I hope we're all ready for this. So for me, my number 1 spot has to be the likes of extreme horror. I think anyone who knows anything about me will know that it's the one that seems to almost define my vocation when it comes to horror, because of almost every time we talk about, when I touch about exploitation or extreme horror films, I seem to almost make you squirm every time I bring this topic up, don't I, Barry?
It depends what the content is. There are certain themes that I do find very disturbing, yeah. It depends on the subject matter specifically.
The problem is with this is that it's about, there's so many films to bring up, but it's about recommending those that are worth talking about.
Okay.
Because like some of them are not easygoing, needless to say. I mean, I think, for example, Jörg Buttgereit's Des Todes King is an absolutely fantastic film. The way that it explores death is almost the cinematic equivalent of Hamlet, if you ignore the cinematic adaptations, if you like.
Yeah.
No, that's very quite an extravagant statement. Whereas Necromantic is not a film I would necessarily recommend to a lot of people, in the same way that I wouldn't recommend. Well, there's plenty of other titles I could bring up. However, I absolutely love the Hong Kong exploitation films, the Category 3 films. So The Untold Story, Dr. Lamb, The Ebola Syndrome. These were films that were deliberately pushing the note in terms of taste, because of the whole handover period in the 1990s. But then, of course, you have, in relation to Hong Kong, the Men Behind the Sun series, which blur the lines between reality and fiction because they depict real atrocities of whether it be the Nanking Massacre or the atrocities in Unit 731. But they come across as quite exploitative. So the question is about recommending films that are worth talking about, because, I think Marina Devon's In My Skin is a great example of extreme cinema, but it deals with self-mutilation, which is something that I find extremely squeamish.
Is that the film with Antonio Banderas?
No, that's Under My Skin.
Sorry.
Yeah, they're very similar. No, they're so close to each other. In My Skin is something else, though. It's just it's absolutely horrific. And then, of course, you have films that like Cannibal Holocaust is one of those films that I think is extremely important. It's one that you can't say, oh, let's sit down and have ourselves a nice couple of beers over watching it. So. One series of extreme horror films, I think Unearthed Films released recently, called Too Extreme for Mainstream, which essentially is some of these films couldn't be released in America through Amazon or Target because of its content. So essentially they said, we're going to release these for a month and then they're out to print afterwards. And you've got films like Torment, which is an extreme dramatization of John Wayne Gacy and his murders. That's all you need to know about that. You've got Deep Web Triple X, which is an extreme anthology, which certainly has its extremes. I didn't eat gummy sweets for months after that. Then, of course, you've got Cruising. You mentioned about Cruising.
Yeah.
Let's just say there's a couple of scenes, there's a segment that sort of goes into that same territory, but goes out a wee little bit further. So in terms of hidden gems, one of them I'd say is Headless. It is an extreme slasher film. It's did any of you two see Found?
I have seen it. Yeah, I've seen Found. I found it a pretty disturbing watch. Yeah, but right. I've seen it.
Yeah, so Headless is one of those slasher films that you can find and Found. It's just expanded into a feature film, and it is, as its title lives up to, let's just say the killer does what you might call an Ed Kemper on some of his victims. Yeah. Let's just keep it as such. I mean, what do you two both think when it comes to extreme horror?
Well, as you know, Samuel, I'm not really a big fan. I'm not really into the films that are there to shock. And I've seen some I mean, what I consider to be extreme would probably be like, I don't know, bloody Teletubbies for you. I don't know. I haven't seen a huge amount of what I'd call extreme films. I mean, would you classify Human Centipede as extreme?
First, yeah, I mean, it's sort of border. I mean, conceptually, it's extreme. The second one, though, yeah.
Oh, okay, it makes the first film look good. I haven't seen that, and I tell you what, I did attempt in watching a Serbian film. Okay,
yeah,
I'm not gonna go into details. I just can't hack it. I had to turn it off. The subject matter, I appreciate it was kind of well made and it was well acted and all that, but the subject matter just no. I had to turn it off.
The thing is, you most likely saw the censored version, and funny enough, there's an aspect of a Serbian film that takes it away from, say, like the Human Centipede films, or even Itchy the Killer, or Murder Set Pieces, or August Underground, for example, which is the lead character is a pretty decent guy, and you're not joining him in the atrocities. You're joining him in reacting. So you have that scene.
Yeah.
We keep as that scene. It's not only sort of there's all not only you're only watching him, Milos, reacting to that scene, rather than just watching the scene itself. So you're joining him and being repulsed by it, and in that sense, it does its job fairly brilliantly. Is it one that I'd recommend to people? Probably not. How about yourself, Darren?
Right, I've not really massive on the this subject. I have seen a few.
He's just thrown up, by the way.
But some of the ones you mentioned is like Famed. I really want to see, and I really want to see Headless as well. Dr. Lamb's been on my list for a while of wanting to see. That Torment that I've never even heard of, but you mentioned John Wayne Gacy, so that's now on my to watch list. But there is one I wanted to mention called, I don't know if you've seen it, called Penance.
I've heard of it, I haven't seen it.
Is that part of the August Underground series?
Yeah,
God.
The story is for the director. He actually left a videotape on the subway in, I think it was New York City or wherever in America, and someone picked up this tape, obviously put it into their tape player, and they thought it was going round that they thought it was an actual snuff film.
Yeah, that does happen. In fact, have any of you two heard of the Guinea Pig series?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So infamously, Charlie Sheen was lent a copy of Flowers of Flesh and Blood, which was the second one. And he went into hysterics and called the FBI, claiming that he saw a real snuff film. Now, thankfully, I've not watched anything that can be classified as a genuine snuff film. There are films, though, that do... They're very, very close. So I think Men Behind the Sun, there's a couple of sequences in terms of pulling people apart, let's just call it that are either too close to being real or they possibly were real. In terms of,
Yeah, definitely. I think the special effects nowadays, or recent, like not gone, recent years, are so good now that sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two. But it's like I say, it's never been one that I've really got drawn into because I've, I'll watch Cannibal Holocaust. I'll watch that all day long. But something I need, don't judge me. Please don't judge me on that.
Not at all. Not at all.
I've got a good therapist if you need one. Do you want his number?
I don't mean to say that, casually as if, I'll just pop it on for everyone who comes in here, like.
Yeah.
But it's something. It's a sub-genre that I do need to. I think. Like, it's my blind spot, but I do really need to dig out a few. So thanks, Sam. I've written a few down, and I will get into that.
Well, tell you what, let me know, because I've got plenty of other titles that are interesting, to say the least. The problem is, it's just about whether or not they're worth your time.
Yeah, it will. We'll save them for the future. As soon as you said August Underground, it just made me shudder, because I've seen snippets, and it really ain't my cup of tea. So to speak, I'm really not into stuff like that. It's purely made for shock value, isn't it? And nothing more. It's just pure shock. And they achieve it, certainly. I caught a few snippets of it years ago, and that was enough. And had it have been my disc I would have probably broke it, but somebody lent it to me. I would have. I wanted to snap it. I actually wanted to snap it. I'm like, this doesn't deserve to exist. But unfortunately, it was someone else's disc, so I had to hand him it back. But I couldn't get through it.
Do you know what? There is one extreme horror film which got a strong reaction out of me. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, Barry. Philosophy of a Knife.
Yeah, I do recall you mentioning it. Yeah.
So it's another film that looks at the atrocities at Unit 731, and there was one bit that just went on and on and on to the point I had to wash my face in cold water for 5 minutes. It was so overwhelming, and I only got halfway through that film.
Wow.
And I think that's the thing, because there are some extreme films, though. I think it's the context. See, for me, I think whilst we've touched on some other films that are absolutely horrific, vile, and disgusting, the context is that they're completely made to shock. With, say, Men Behind the Sun, Philosophy of a Knife, these are based on things that actually happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's that context that makes it go... It's like Cannibal by Maury and Dora. The context is that's based on the Rottenberg cannibal case.
Yeah.
So it's those... With the context that it's based on real things, then is where it sort of gets under my skin.
Yeah.
Right, Sam, so would you say I Spit on Your Grave and stuff like that is extreme films?
That's certainly... Well... It depends on which one you're talking about. If you're talking about the 1978 version, that was originally titled as Day of the Woman. So the question is that just depicting the harsh reality of what sexual violence is like, or is it exploiting it? So it's extreme in the sense of it shows the honesty of what happens in that situation. I think I'm a little bit biased because it's a film that has a significance for me. Not that I could watch it necessarily again and again. Some of the video nasties are bland for today's standards. Nightmares on a Damaged Brain is a pretty entertaining example if you want. But I Spit on Your Grave is definitely, like Cannibal Holocaust, is challenging. Extreme? Yeah, actually I'd say so. I mean, depiction is not... Say again, sorry?
In the same way as like Last House on the Left, I would say. Is probably...
Oh, yeah, definitely. In fact, you could never get the uncut version of Last House on the Left until 2008. It is a film that is grimy. It presents violence in its completely honest form. And that's the key thing with extreme cinema and extreme horror. Even though it's extreme, it doesn't mean it's exploitative. And that's the key thing, because you've got films like Martyrs or Irreversible that are extreme, but they're not necessarily exploiting the subject matter.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, that was a hard watch. Irreversible.
Oh, sure.
That was a tough. Yeah, that was good film, but yeah, it's a tough watch. And with I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left and that, yeah, I mean, it's easy to see why them films cause so much controversy when they come out. But yeah, I saw the 2010 I Spit on Your Grave remake, and obviously we're in a time now where you can get away with a hell of a lot more on screen, and oh my god. Yeah, I mean, it makes the original film look really tame, doesn't it, in comparison?
I have a lot of problems with the 2010 remake of that film. However, I think we could probably save that for a completely different time. So I just want to leave on that. Like, there are issues with that film. I mean, some people certainly class it as extreme, but the fact that it's been passed almost completely uncut certainly says a potential desensitization of this sort of material, which then again, though, I mean, the films that Unearthed Films released, most of them I don't think you could ever get released in this country, for example.
Yeah.
I think the I Spit on Your Grave, they've come out with a new box set here in the UK, and as far as I know, I think the remake is actually still cut. So yeah, I didn't bother buying it.
The original I Spit on Your Grave, the 2010, and even the I Spit on Your Grave 2, which came out, I think, 2013, 2014, are all cut.
Yeah.
So there's about 40 seconds cut from 2010, almost 4 minutes cut from its sequel, and there's still like nearly 2 minutes cut from the original I Spit on Your Grave. So they're almost completely worthless for any collector out there.
I've got the Millennium Edition, Region 1 of I Spit on Your Grave. That's fully uncut. That's from America. And I did buy the I'm saying that, about 7, 8 years ago edition in the UK, but that's cut. But I sort of bought it for the packaging. But yeah, I didn't know whether that would be included, that film, but it's a tough watch, put it that way.
Oh. Yeah, certainly. Camille Keaton, to link it back to Giallo, Camille Keaton, of course, in the lead role, I think does a very, very good job in such a distressing role.
Okay.
And I think if you can endure that film, there's a great payoff at the end. So that's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, they certainly deserve it. But all right, we're going to get onto the final. We're going to get onto the final subgenre now, and that's my number one pick, which is psychological horror. I love films that are very cerebral, films that kind of blur the lines between fantasy and reality, films that kind of probe the meat recesses of the mind. There's so many films out there, especially the 70s, I think was a great decade for psychological horror. One of my favourite psychological horror films, I think that is very often overlooked, I think it's a shame actually, is The Tenant, directed by and starring Roman Polanski. Great, creepy atmosphere, it's claustrophobic, and again, it's really about a man's descent into madness. And, in the same year, a very overlooked film, in fact. I don't even know if I've met someone yet that's seen this film. Or, I've mentioned this film to a lot of people and no one's like, oh, I haven't seen it. And that's Images, released in 1972. It directed by Robert Altman. And it was actually John Williams that did the score before he hit the big time with Jaws in 1975. Have either of you two guys seen Images?
No,
I haven't. No,
that's what it's on Blu-ray. It's come out on Blu-ray and that.
Is that a film from 1972?
72, yes.
Yeah, I think there's an Arrow release. I have.
That's the version I've got. Yeah, that's what I've got.
Right. Yeah, I know of it.
Yeah. It's really about a woman's descent into madness. It explores paranoid schizophrenia. There's just some really creepy moments in the film. Again, it's very distorted. There's this kind of... It blurs the lines between fantasy and reality, and you're not sure what's real and what isn't. Even Eraserhead is kind of a psychological horror film in a way. And a recent film, actually, as well, released in 2015, which is more a thriller, but there's certainly horror elements to it, certainly in the final act of the film. And that is The Invitation.
Yes.
The Invitation's a really good film. It's very deftly directed. The whole kind of aspect of is this man being paranoid, or is there something really sinister going on at this dinner party that he's invited to by his ex? Really good film. It's a film that, again, its reviews are really good, but just I don't think enough people have seen it. And one of my all-time favourites, again, this is a film that I own on Blu-ray. I've mentioned it many, many times before. Magic, released in 1978.
Yes.
Anthony Hopkins. It's a creepy film that, again, explores paranoid schizophrenia. He believes this dummy to be alive. In fact, the dummy is probably the creepiest dummy we've ever had put on screen. I just love them films that play on... the whole kind of one psychology, a fractured mind, if you will, and just kind of they make you feel uneasy. And, with slasher movies and supernatural films, which actually wasn't in our favourite subgenres, by the way. I know it's one of the most popular subgenres out there, but nobody had it in the top 3, did we? For supernatural.
No, it would have been in my top 5.
Yeah, it would have mine as well.
But it doesn't do anything for me.
Oh, right.
Oh, there's a lot of...
I can watch them.
Yeah.
I can watch them, but it's just not one I would selectively choose.
I was tempted to put in haunted house films as well. I was really tempted.
Supernatural. There are a lot of supernatural films that I do love. There are, films like The Haunting, The Innocents, even 2001's The Others, starring Nicole Kidman. I think that's a really good film as well.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that. I've not seen that one.
The Others?
But, no. But because you mentioned The Tenant, right? One I really do like is Repulsion.
Well, that's one of the others that I was going to bring up. I was getting to it.
Oh, right, sorry.
No, I was getting to it, because that was actually the first of Roman Polanski's, what he called apartment trilogy, released in 1965.
I think that's a great film.
It is.
Really
and unfortunately, The Tenant came out 11 years later it is overshadowed by Rosemary's Baby and even Repulsion. Rosemary's Baby is considered by many to be the best and certainly the most popular of them three films. It's a great film, Rosemary's Baby, but I think The Tenant is the one that actually does deserve more attention. Even in 1990, Jacob's Ladder, which again is very much a psychological horror film, but again it kind of goes into that territory of body horror almost as well. But Jacob's Ladder, I'm assuming you have both seen that.
It's been a while, yeah.
Have you seen it?
I haven't seen
You've not
that,
seen Jacob's Ladder?
No.
Oh, wow.
I got quite a few blind spots, you know.
Oh.
I'm usually mainly like concentrate on slashers, giallo and that. But
Jacob's Ladder is a good film.
That's the reason for doing this podcast, I think, to broaden my horizons a bit more.
Yeah, Jacob's Ladder, it's a film that has a cult following. It's a bit of a cult horror film. It was directed by Adrian Lyne, that directed Fatal Attraction, Indecent Proposal, 9.5 Weeks. Macaulay Culkin's in there. Same year as Home Alone, but before Home Alone, so he wasn't the household name.
Didn't he do another horror film as well, The Good Son?
Which was banned,
that's a thriller, though.
Britain.
Yeah, that's a thriller. I wouldn't count
right.
horror movie. But yeah, he was in The Good Son alongside Elijah Wood. They starred alongside each other in that film. But yeah, it stars Tim Robbins, obviously, of Shawshank fame, 4 years before Shawshank Redemption. Jacob's Ladder, yeah, good film. Trying to think of some more, actually, psychological horror films. I mean, the 70s, as I say, in the 70s, you had the likes of Magic, Tenant, Images. Don't Look Now certainly could be considered a psychological horror film. And we did a podcast on that a little while ago, didn't we?
Yeah, supernatural elements as well in that.
Yeah. There's another
go back to listen to the podcast because that's a great film again.
Chasing Sleep, not one of the best of its kind, but again, there was a movie called Chasing Sleep, early 90s, I believe, starring Jeff Daniels. As I said, not one of the greats or anything, but definitely a film that deserves a bit more attention, I'd say. Session 9, as well, released in 2001. There's obviously a very psychological component to that film. I love the sense of claustrophobia. You know, they're in an abandoned mental institution. I think it's a really good setting for that film. Again, you could say there's kind of slasher elements to it because people get killed off, and that it's not really a slasher film. There's more of a psychological element to the movie. But I just love films like that. Put me on edge with slasher and supernatural. Films like that typically, I think you'll agree, are very reliant on jump scares and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, with psychological, you don't really get that. There might be some psychological horror films out there that do have the occasional jump scare and stuff, but it's that sense of unease. It's that there's a sense of dread, a sense of something's not quite right through the course of the film. And that's what I love. It isn't reliant on them cheap jump scares, because jump scares can be effective, you know, if used wisely. It all depends on how they're executed and that. But that's what I love. It's the human mind and like the darkness that can exist within it. And I just love them. And that's what I like about Nightmare on Elm Street, actually. A component here is, you know, with the original film and that, especially when it came out, it's like, are they asleep or are they awake? That whole kind of, you don't know if they're in the dream world or if they're actually in the real world. Like, what's real, what isn't? And that is a component that has always interested me, really has intrigued me when it comes to horror and thriller.
It's a subgenre, psychological, that it's like, I don't really know what sort of qualifies, if that seems right.
Well, with psychological, the films that I've just mentioned most, right? Not all, because as I said, there's even thrillers that, you know, there's psychological thrillers as well. It's kind of like splitting hairs sometimes. You know, what's the difference between a horror and a thriller? With psychological in that, films like The Tenant and Repulsion, they're two very good examples. They were about almost like the degradation of the mind.
Yeah.
So somebody's psyche becoming fractured during the course of the film. It might be fractured from the get-go, or it's a succession of events that causes this person to lose their grasp on reality. And most of the 70s horror films, most of the horror films that I've just talked about, psychological, involve that. Images, Magic, Repulsion, and The Tenant are all films that have them. Another one is Pin, released in 88. a boy that forges a friendship with a mannequin. And again, it explores paranoid schizophrenia. He believes that this mannequin is alive.
Right, okay.
So again, it plays on one's mind, and that's really, I think, what qualifies a lot of the time as a psychological horror movie. But again, this psychological thrillers, a film like The Invitation, it is described, it is labelled as a psychological horror movie. That's what the film's label is. Again, I think the psychological aspect really comes from the whole sense of paranoia. Is it in his mind or isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't really become a horror movie per se until the final act of the film, where it becomes, it kind of veers into horror territory towards the end. But during the course of the film, you're with this guy every step of the way thinking, hang on a sec, is he being paranoid, or is there something dodgy going on here? And that's what I love. I just love the whole, when them lines become distorted. And I've always found that a really creepy thing. To me, that's scarier than anything else in horror. Slashers, ghosts, no. It's the human mind playing tricks on you. I find that a lot scarier.
I can see that.
That was a proper rant, wasn't it?
it's another genre I need to delve into, I think.
I think you liked Repulsion, yeah?
Yeah, big time.
Then.
Yeah,
if you like Repulsion, if you liked Repulsion and wasn't bored by it, because I know some people that find that film too slow-paced and boring, then I would certainly say you're a good candidate to like psychological horror films.
Yeah, I like a slow burn as well.
Exactly.
It's not as if I gotta have everything, coming at me 100%.
Well, every film I've just mentioned, every single one is a slow burn. Every single psychological horror film that I've just mentioned there, they're all pretty slow-paced films.
It's just one of those type of films you just gotta be in the right mood, I guess.
Actually, it is the question there. Would you classify American Psycho as a psychological horror?
That's
a great question, that is.
Well, that's kind of up for debate, because we don't actually know whether he... Now, I know Mary Harron, the director, actually did say that he committed all their murders, which would actually say that it's not a psychological horror film. But if it was all in his mind and it didn't exist, then yeah, I would classify that as psychological. But they've actually said that he did kill. So no,
that's interesting, because the book that is not actually explicitly revealed that that's the case. Okay, so what about, say, because the reason I was a bit hesitant is because you say the lines seem to blur in terms of what classifies as psychological horror, because to me something like, say, Peeping Tom would be classed as a psychological horror, but not to the same degree as Repulsion. How far would you agree with that or disagree?
Well, again, you'd have to count Psycho as one as well then. Psycho would have to be categorised in the same bracket as Peeping Tom, because they deal with quite similar themes to a degree. Again, a lot of it's splitting hairs.
Yeah.
A lot of it is splitting hairs. It's kind of like, like I said, getting back to Silence of the Lambs, people count that as a horror film. I don't. I've never... There's a psychological aspect to it, certainly, but because he has a grasp on reality as to what's going on, etc., completely, and obviously it's told from a kind of psychological standpoint, he's a sympathetic character, much like Norman Bates. I wouldn't have categorised it myself as a psychological horror film. Personally.
Right, I've got one for you.
Oh my God, what is this? You've got me in the limelight now, aren't you? Jesus.
I'm
not an authority on all things. Go on.
I don't know if you've seen it anyway, but there's one called Frailty. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, I have. That? Yeah, good film, directed by Bill Paxton. Matthew McConaughey. Would you class that as
psychological horror? Because I really like that film.
Again, it can be, can't it? It's I've never really thought about that one before. You've kind of put me right under the spotlight, and it's I've never considered. It could be deemed to be one, I guess, because obviously the whole, you believe that, the voice of God, blah blah, he believes that God's told him to do this, etc. You think, all right, he's clearly, he's loony. But then of course there's a little aspect that happens in the film that kind of proves that, hang on a sec, there's something actually, that he may actually be telling the truth and it's not deluded.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a tough one. That's a real tough one to categorise.
Okay.
You know, like I said, with American Psycho, I know it's traditionally it's not classed as a psychological horror film. That's not the label that's usually given to it. But I suppose, yeah, with the whole, like, hang on a sec, was it in his head and all this and that? A very psychological component, yeah, without a doubt.
Well, you know my thoughts on American Psycho, you know. I think but he partly done some of the murders, and I think partly some of them are in his head.
Yeah.
So I think I still think that would qualify from what, you know, the outline of what you've been saying. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an authority. I mean, I've never read it up. I've never read it up at all. I'm just going by kind of what I've kind of like taken psychological horror films from my own personal view over the years. I've never looked up the definition myself. But the films that I mentioned definitely 100% are psychological horror films because they're to do with the damaged mind, the psyche. American Psycho falls into a few categories. That's a real tough one to do because in a way you could say it's kind of part slasher, part social satire.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
American Psycho's a social satire as well, and it's a tough film. American Psycho is a very tough film to put into one category. It really is. It's a great film, though, you know. But yeah, so that's my favourite. I think always will be. I've always had a soft spot for them films that kind of, you know, deal with them themes and that. But well, guys, you know what? We've taken it to nearly 2 hours.
Right. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
Which is about 45 minutes, I'd say. 45 minutes longer than I thought it would, but there was a lot of stuff to talk about and that. And it's been great doing. I'm hoping people have, you know, listened to the end. Yeah, hoping so. So, yeah, we're gonna wrap it up for today. But that was great. I hope you guys had fun doing it.
Oh, absolutely. It was an absolute ball.
Yeah, I've come out of the conversation with quite a few names written down of films. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
It's the closest thing I've ever had to a threesome as well. So, thanks for that, guys. Yeah. But yeah, it was quite the experience. Obviously, the first time I've had you both on before, but just never at the same time. So
let's do some more because it's been a lot of fun, like I say. So hopefully we can do a few more of these.
Yeah,
oh, definitely.
I think we'll save what we'll do because with movie ones, because obviously when I'm doing podcasts, I don't want every podcast to be an hour and a half long, 2 hours. So what we'll do is we'll save certain subjects for all three of us.
Yeah, sounds good.
Otherwise, we'd be doing hour and a half, 2 hour podcasts each time, and that would be really hard to kind of commit that level of time to it. But we'll definitely do one, all three of us, soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm up for that.
Sounds like a plan.
So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks to everyone that listened, and we'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. There was actually going to be a shout out, and unfortunately, I haven't actually got my phone on me now, and I've actually forgotten the name. That's really embarrassing. But there is actually a fan-made film coming out. I believe the guy behind it is Roland Keller. And what it's going to be, I believe it's going to be a sequel to My Bloody Valentine, the 81 slasher film, and it's called Valentine's Bluff. And any help with that, any kind of funding, just however small, is greatly appreciated. Really looking forward to this fan-made film because My Bloody Valentine is a slasher film that I feel deserves a sequel. So, yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for you guys for joining.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, like I say, and yeah.
Hasn't been too traumatic for either one of you, has it?
Nah, it's just a walk in the park for me.
No, just everyday conversation for me.
I'm
talking about Cannibal Holocaust. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to get August. I think Samuel should just go and fucking wash his mouth out after this. Go and brush your teeth for about 20 minutes tonight, and you'll be all right. Yeah, thanks a lot for everyone that joined us, and we'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.